Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to continue looking at the mid-19th century civil rights movement. And where we last left off was the Brown case, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. The case that really broke segregated education in the United States and really broke segregation in the United States. It served to fuel the fires of social reformers, social campaigners from the mid 1950s into the late 1960s. Where we last left off was the argument, the central argument of the Brown case, which was that the separation of students of African Americans and European Americans was inherently equal, even if the facilities were equal, because they bred in African American students this identity of second-class citizenship that impaired their lives beyond all repair. Now, Kenneth B. Clark of Harvard education was a prominent African American sociologist, and he was brought in to illustrate the NAACP's point using two sets of dolls. Clark used the dolls to indicate how African American students showed deference and a preference for dolls with European features. Now, this illustration swayed the court along with Marshall's very reasoned arguments, and Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who had succeeded Fred Vinson back in 1953, he wrote for the court that segregation generates in black children a feeling of inferiority to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely to ever be undone. Now, in a follow-up decision to the case commonly known as Brown 2, the Supreme Court set out guidelines for integrating the educational systems of the Republic. Now, this phrase, with all deliberate speed, was taken to mean as slowly as possible by segregation holdouts. In 1956, Dixiecrat congressmen issued the Southern Manifesto, a rallying cry that denounced the Brown decision and really defied its provisions. In early 1957, segregation holdouts formed the White Citizens Council, a multi-branch organization that was devoted to blocking the enforcement of the Brown ruling or implementing civil rights initiatives. Adopting the symbols of the Confederate States of America, and really by symbols, I'm zeroing in on the leaders of the Confederate States of America and the flags and emblems of the Confederate States of America to really sort of unite their separate branches and to really sort of show solidarity within themselves. They use these as emblems of their resistance, and in a lot of instances, some of the more extreme segregationists joined the Ku Klux Klan, which saw a major resurgence of popularity and membership for the first time since the 1920s. The situation, I should say. Sorry about that. Got a bit tongue-tied there. The situation looked dire as the new academic year loomed. Both the civil rights organizations and the segregationists readied for a confrontation. In September of 1957, the Little Rock School Board decided to integrate the city's segregated Central High School. The nine African American students were selected to be the first nine to integrate the school, and they were Minnie Jean Brown, Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Thelma Mothershed, Melba Patillo, Gloria Ray, Terrence Roberts, Jefferson Thomas, and Carlotta Watts, and they're collectively known and really better known as the Little Rock Nine. They were met by crowds of jeering students and their parents and news crews that captured events and broadcasting scenes that shocked the nation and the world. While a furor was erupting over the conduct of the segregationists, then Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus, one of really the four great segregationists of this era, the real great opponents of civil rights, of integration, of desegregation. Orville Faubus, George Wallace of Alabama is another one, and Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, the big three, so to speak, of the pro-segregationists. Orville Faubus, then sitting governor of Arkansas, sent in the Arkansas National Guard, not to protect the Little Rock Nine, but to ensure that they could not gain entrance into the school. Now, Faubus's decision to call out the Arkansas National Guard was the last straw for President Dwight Eisenhower, who very reluctantly and under great scrutiny, stemming from the media coverage and globalization of this coverage, I should say, nationalized the Arkansas National Guard, calling them into federal service, and then sent 1,000 troops from the 101st Airborne Division to ensure that those students gained entrance into the school. Now, in the end, Orville Faubus tried to block the door with his body. He literally did. He stretched his arms out and spread his legs in the doorway to impede the students' entry, and he had to be very embarrassingly dragged away from. He had to be very embarrassingly dragged away from the door entrance, and he was dragged away kicking and screaming, I should say. But in the end, Central High School was integrated. Central High School remained a rarity rolling into the 1960s. Consistent integration did not occur in the southeastern states until the 1970s, and even then, it was staunchly resisted. The federal enforcement of public school integration led many parents to simply enroll their children in private academies that allowed segregation to continue. The situation was further exacerbated when the federal government instituted a busing program that sent children to schools outside of their neighborhoods. Parents on both sides of the equation were incensed by the busing program. Massachusetts and Michigan were notable for sites of anti-busing protests. Massachusetts in particular, Boston in particular, there was the situation in Boston to busing really brought back images of the Little Rock protest. It was parents and children hurling racial insults at children going to school. A very sad day for education in America. Now, the gains of the mid 20th century civil rights movement were important because they represented the top-down gains for African Americans, the integration of the military, professional athletics, and schools. The NAACP and other civil rights organizations were typically the driving force behind these achievements. These organizations were headquartered out of the Southeast. Within the Southeast, a very local grassroots movement sprung up, spearheaded by local African American communities. Now, these communities provided the foundation to the real bite the civil rights movement would employ by engaging in direct challenge to Jim Crow and the established status quo. And I want to break here from my lecture. I wasn't planning on including this. We're going to put this in a fact, and I still will. But I want to interject before we get on to my next speaking point. And my next speaking point was going to be the Montgomery bus boycott. But before that, I'd like to touch on the Emmett Till lynching. For those of you who may not know, Emmett Till was a young African American male, a boy really, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago, Illinois, who was sent to the South to visit family members by his mother. His mother had grown up in the South, and his father was from the South as well. but Till has spent his entire life in Chicago. He had no sort of recollection of what Southern life was like, what the custom was like, and before he left, his mother sort of gave him a crash course, what it would have known has to talk, and how to react and how to behave in certain situations. In Mississippi, she was going down to Mississippi, and he listened. He got to talk. He boarded his train and he went down south. And on one fateful day, he and his cousins the story goes, they were doing some sort of field work, and they had been given a break, and they were allowed to go into the convenience store to purchase refreshments, which they did. And supposedly, Till, he was alleged to have whistled at a young Caucasian woman, a European American woman behind the counter, who was the wife of the store's owner. He allegedly whistled at her, and then left the store smiling. The story vacillates between him saying "bye, baby" to her, between him whistling at her, and between him whistling at her and then saying "bye, baby." Well, in any event, a story circulated about him within town, and two men set out for the Till household. The woman, Carolyn Bryant, her husband and his half brother went to Till's uncle's house, where they, at gunpoint, ordered him out of the house. He got into the car and he was never seen alive again. He was beaten. He was beaten in the car and taken to an old abandoned mill on the Tallahatchie River, where he was beaten some more before being shot in the back of the head, and his body was then unceremoniously dumped into the river, weighted down by an engine block. Chain was tied to his body and to the engine block, and with the effect that the engine block would simply weigh his body down so that he would never be found. An investigation was launched. The men were arrested but acquitted by an all-white jury in Mississippi, and that would have just been that. But Till's mother, Mamie Till, she refused to let him die in vain, and she sparked national and global outrage with his murder, with the murder of the 14-year-old boy by grown men. The campaign, the campaign that she launched, and in particularly, she set out, and it was a very tough and difficult decision undertaken for her, because she, one, made the decision to have an open casket, which shocked everybody when they saw the bloated and deformed body of this child. And then she would show pictures of him before his death, and it showed a normal, healthy child. And it really laid the foundation for it, because it shocked everybody, because particularly in the Southeast, because now they knew that not even the children were safe. Adults were fair game. Adult men had to be careful on what they did. Adult women had to be careful on what they did, where they went. Lynching and rapings were fairly common. But this was the straw that broke the camel back, and really sort of galvanized them, and sort of made the local African American communities in the Southeast on heightened awareness, and sort of pushed them towards fighting, to organizing and fighting back against Jim Crow segregation. And with that, I'd like to dive right into our next speaking point, which is the Montgomery bus boycott. Now, Rosa Parks rose to fame, or infamy as some still see it, on the 2nd of December 1955. Parks was a seamstress and a member of the local NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama. And she was heading home after work on a city bus when she was asked to give up her seat for a white male passenger who had just boarded the bus. Now, it was the established custom following the Redeemer political victory in the compromise/corrupt bargain of 1877 that in this Redeemer established social order, there was to be a continuation of the deference that the slaves showed to masters, but this deference will be expanded for all African Americans, showing this deference to all European Americans. In the Jim Crow social system, African Americans were required by law to show deference in all situations, public and private, to European Americans, using separate entrance to movie theaters, standing aside while European Americans walked on the street, placing meal orders at back entrances to kitchens, and giving up their seats on public buses and other modes of transportation when the European American or white section was full. Now, many businesses added these stipulations to their terms of service, though the practice was established by law. Now, these practices represented the cruelty and indignity that was served, really impressed upon African Americans. It reinforced that unfair status within this racial caste system, this second-class citizenship. Now, Parks' decision to resist the attempts to force her to give up her seat was not a spontaneous act. It was not a spontaneous decision on her part. She had been thinking for a while of a way to make an impact on the social rights, on this social issue, on this civil rights issue. The shock of a socially involved, upstanding community member whose dignity had been impugned provided the final push for that local African American community, the final push needed for that community to act. Parks was arrested for disorderly conduct immediately, leading Joanne Robinson, the leader of the Women's Political Council, to circulate 52,000 flyers calling for a one-day boycott of the local buses on December 5th, which was Parks' trial date. Parks was bailed out of jail by E.D. Nixon, who called on Ralph Abernathy, a pastor at First Baptist Church, and Martin Luther King Jr. of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Now, the conscious decision to turn to church leaders was instinctual. The religious environment, the religious community, served an integral purpose on the old plantations and in the free communities since the founding of Mother Bethel. The Mother Bethel Baptist Church, founded in 1787 in Philadelphia. Now, it was also one of the few, the church religion was one of the few institutions of African American community that was left purely up to them. Religious life was more than just worship. It was at times the only safe refuge for African American communities to engage in civic discourse and political activities, and also social healing. Now, church leaders were often the most educated and cultured members of the community and occupied positions of civic leadership. Abernathy and King fit this mold. Abernathy was a graduate of Alabama State College, a founding member of the Southern Christian, the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Sorry about that. I had to say the acronym and then go from the acronym. But he was a founding member. King was a graduate of Boston University, where he earned a PhD in theology. King would also go on to be a central figure in the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. We'll get to King and his social campaigns, his crusades fighting segregation and discrimination across the Southeast, participating in the largest civil rights march in United States history, and being awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. We'll get to the life and career of Dr. Martin Luther King in subsequent lectures. Now, on December 5th, 1955, an eerie quiet settled on the Montgomery public buses, which were typically full of men and women heading to factories and heading down to suburban homes. Local Montgomery authorities became convinced that local African American goon squads were responsible for this anomaly. Police officers were promptly dispatched to restore order, but found that no goon squads were out impeding traffic on public transportations. The boycott was wholeheartedly supported by the community. After Parks was convicted of violating the city segregation ordinance, the boycott leaders organized the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA. King was elected to serve as the organization's president and set a course of action that called for continuing the bus boycott and end of segregation in Montgomery. Now, King used fiery, persuasive rhetoric to endear his followers to his brand of non-violent to this non-violent philosophy, to this non-violent civic disobedience, which he had adopted from the Indian anti-colonialist leader Mohandas Gandhi. Now the MIA stood firm against the trampling iron feet of oppression, peacefully resisting police intimidation and desegregation and communal violence. We'll break here and we'll come back with another lecture continuing our discourse on the mid-20th century civil rights movement. As always, I'm Ted. Hit like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you guys next time.